The air was thick with humidity. The kind that clung to your skin and made your shirt stick to your back. Officer Tyler Jamison sat in his patrol car, one hand resting lazily on the steering wheel while the other flipped through radio channels in search of anything remotely interesting. The soft crackle of static followed each click. Nothing but silence and monotony. As usual. It was late afternoon in the suburban side of Atlanta, Georgia. The sun was beginning its descent, casting a golden hue across the wide streets and carefully maintained lawns. Rows of two-story homes, painted in soft pastels and whites, stood like sentinels of privilege. To Tyler, it all felt suffocating, too clean, too quiet, too fake. He exhaled heavily and took a swig from his lukewarm coffee. His jaw clenched as he glanced out the windshield, his eyes narrowing at the sight of a lone figure sitting at a park bench across the street. A teenage boy, young, black, hoodie pulled over his head, headphones in, backpack slung at his side. Alone. Tyler's fingers tapped against the steering wheel. Something about the kid rubbed him the wrong way, not because of anything the boy was doing, but because of what he might do. The thought slithered into his mind like a snake. Why's he here? He pulled the gear into park, opened the door, and stepped out. His boots crunched against the sidewalk as he crossed toward the park. The boy didn't seem to notice him approaching. His head bobbed slightly to whatever music played through his headphones. "Hey," Tyler barked. No response. He tried again, louder. "Hey, you, take those off." The boy startled, pulling out one earbud. His eyes widened slightly at the sight of the officer. But he said nothing. Tyler's gaze swept over the kid. No weapons, no suspicious packages, just a boy. But it didn't matter. Years of conditioning had taught him that this image, a black teenager in a white neighborhood, was cause enough. "What are you doing here?" Tyler demanded. "Just listening to music," the boy replied, his voice quiet but even. "Waiting for my driver." "Driver?" Tyler echoed with a snort. "Sure you are." The boy nodded. "My dad said he'd send the car at 5. "What's your name?" Tyler pressed. "Malik." The boy answered. "Malik what?" "Malik Thompson." "Got ID?" Malik hesitated. "I'm 14. I don't have an ID." Tyler's tone sharpened. "Then how the hell am I supposed to know you're not trespassing?" "I'm not." "Stand up." Malik slowly rose from the bench. His movements deliberate, cautious. His hands trembled slightly. Tyler noticed and immediately interpreted it as guilt. Or resistance. "Put your hands where I can see them," Tyler said, stepping closer. Malik complied, his palms open and visible. "I'm not doing anything wrong." "Sir, don't talk back," Tyler snapped. He grabbed the boy by the arm, spinning him around and pressing him forward. Malik yelped in pain. Hey, stop, you're hurting me. Stop resisting," Tyler barked, shoving him face first against the bench. Malik gasped, panic flooding his voice. A woman across the park gasped, fumbling for her phone. The scene was being filmed now. Tyler didn't notice, or maybe he didn't care. Malik was on the ground, his cheek scraped against the pavement. Tyler pinned his arms behind his back, breathing hard. The boy wasn't fighting, he was crying. "I didn't do anything," Malik whispered. "Please." The words hung in the air. It wasn't until a bystander shouted, "Hey, let him go. He's a kid," that Tyler finally looked up. Faces, phones, eyes. He straightened, brushing off his uniform, trying to regain control of the situation. "I'll let you off with a warning," he muttered, like he was doing the boy a favor. Malik sat up slowly, holding his arm. He didn't look at Tyler. He didn't say a word. But he would remember everything. So would the internet. Within hours, the video went viral. The video was 1 minute and 37 seconds long. It started with Malik sitting on the bench, Tyler walking into frame, his posture already aggressive. The shouting came next, the physical force, the screams, and finally, the image of a black child crying while a white officer towered above him. Within hours, the footage had been posted to Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, and every major social media outlet. The hashtags were instant and cutting. Hashtag justice for Malik. Hashtag he was just sitting. Hashtag protect black children. Tyler didn't check his phone that night. He went home like he always did. He made dinner. He opened a beer. He watched a game. He slept soundly. By morning, his world had changed. The police department's phone lines were flooded. Journalists surrounded the station, demanding a statement. Parents at the local school demanded the officer be removed immediately. Celebrities retweeted the video. Activists called for justice. Tyler, walking into work with his coffee, was greeted by silence. The chief called him into the office. "We've got a situation." Tyler rolled his eyes. "It's just another overreaction." The chief stared at him. "You assaulted a minor on video." He looked suspicious. He was alone, in a rich neighborhood. No ID. "I followed protocol." "No, Tyler, you didn't." For a moment, Tyler's pride rose in his chest like a shield. "You know how it is. These kids." "Stop." The chief cut him off. "This isn't about these kids. This is about you. We're placing you on administrative leave pending investigation." Tyler stood up abruptly. "You're throwing me under the bus. We're trying to keep this department from burning down." The chief replied, "You better hope it's not worse than it looks." Tyler left the room in disbelief. As he stepped outside, cameras flashed in his face. Reporters shouted his name. For the first time in years, Tyler felt something unfamiliar: fear. In Washington, D.C., Vice President Jonathan Thompson sat at his desk when his phone rang. He answered on the second ring. "Mr. Vice President," his wife said, her voice tight. "It's Malik." Jonathan stood up instantly. "What happened?" "He was attacked by a police officer in Atlanta, while waiting for the driver." Jonathan's blood turned to ice. "Is he okay?" "He's shaken. There's a video." Jonathan didn't speak. He opened his laptop and clicked the link she sent him. The video played. He watched in silence as his son, his only child, was thrown to the ground. Manhandled. Humiliated. He heard his son's voice tremble as he pleaded, "I'm not doing anything." Jonathan's jaw clenched. His heart thundered. The Vice President of the United States had seen many things in his lifetime: injustice, discrimination, hatred. He had marched in protests, defended the innocent in court, and challenged systems built to oppress. But nothing had prepared him to watch his own son brutalized. He didn't throw things. He didn't scream. He closed the laptop. He called his security chief. "Get the jet ready. I'm going to Atlanta." The nation watched as the story caught fire. Cable news anchors debated it all night. Was the boy really a threat? Was the officer justified? What if he had been white? The questions weren't new, but the stakes were different now. The country had seen this before, too many times, but this time, the victim wasn't just a name. This was the son of the Vice President of the United States. By dawn, the video had amassed over 42 million views. Outside Malik's hospital room, a pair of Secret Service agents stood at rigid attention. Inside, the boy lay in bed, his wrist bandaged, his face pale, eyes distant. He hadn't spoken much since arriving. He'd only asked for his mother. When she arrived, he cried, just once, and then said nothing more. Jonathan Thompson entered the hospital with a stride that carried both fury and restraint. Reporters tried to swarm him at the entrance, but the federal agents pushed them back. He kept his head down, face stone cold, a man of power, yes, but now more than ever, a father. He stood at the door of the hospital room, took a breath, and stepped in. Malik looked up. "Dad." Jonathan walked over and knelt beside the bed. He took his son's hand and held it tightly. "I'm here, buddy." Malik's voice cracked. "I didn't do anything. He just grabbed me." "I know," Jonathan said gently. "I saw the video. Why did he hate me? He didn't even know me." Jonathan closed his eyes for a moment. Because people like him see what they want to see. They see the hoodie, the skin, the fear in your eyes, and they make up a story in their head. "I was just listening to music," Malik whispered. "I know," Jonathan replied, swallowing hard. "And that should have been enough." He looked into his son's eyes. "I promise you this won't be swept under the rug. You are not invisible, and he will not get away with it." For a moment, father and son just held each other in silence, the weight of generations between them. While Washington tried to maintain diplomatic distance, the news media exploded. By noon, every major network had run headlines like, "Malik Thompson assaulted by officer while waiting in park." "Racial profiling hits the White House." "Officer on leave amid scandal." The White House press secretary issued a vague, cautious statement. The vice president and second lady are grateful that their son is physically safe. The matter is under investigation, and the vice president is focused on supporting his family. But Jonathan Thompson didn't stay silent for long. 2 days later, Standing before a row of microphones outside the hospital, the vice president addressed the nation directly. "I come to you not as a politician," he said, "but as a father, a black father raising a black son in a country that still struggles to see us as human first." He spoke with calm, controlled power. "What happened to my son is not isolated. It is not new. It is part of a pattern. But let me be clear, this is not just about my son. It is about every child who has been treated like a suspect simply for existing. I do not seek vengeance. I seek justice." The crowd was quiet. The world was watching. He stepped back. No slogans, no theatrics, just a man who had lived with this truth all his life. Now holding the full weight of it in his arms, Tyler Jamison sat in his living room, the blinds drawn tight. His phone buzzed every few minutes with alerts he didn't want to read. He'd turned off notifications, but they still found their way through. Emails, voicemails, hate messages, even death threats. He paced the room like a caged animal. The TV blared, and every channel showed his face. Over and over again, that same video played, the boy flinching, crying, falling. His image had become a symbol, not of law enforcement, but of the disease within it. He snapped and threw the remote across the room. It hit the wall and shattered. "What the hell is happening?" he growled to no one. He picked up the phone and called his old friend, Officer Grayson. "They're blowing this out of proportion." He looked suspicious. "What was I supposed to do? Just let him sit there?" There was a pause on the line. "Ty," Grayson said slowly, "you messed up. He didn't obey orders. He was a kid, Ty, 14, and you slammed him like a felon. You're taking their side now? I'm taking the side of reality. Man, you need to lawyer up. And maybe, just maybe, start thinking about what made you see that boy as a threat." Tyler hung up and stared at the wall. He didn't see what he'd done wrong. Not really. Not yet. The police department, meanwhile, was in crisis mode. Chief Eleanor Hayes, the city's first black female police chief, had a press conference scheduled within 24 hours. She looked tired, worn, like someone carrying a burden that wasn't hers but had always been waiting for her to inherit. She stood behind the podium, her uniform crisp, her face unreadable. "We are aware of the incident involving Officer Tyler Jamison and a minor. We have reviewed the footage, and we have heard the public's concerns. Effective immediately, Officer Jamison is placed on unpaid administrative leave pending a full investigation. A third-party civil rights oversight committee has been brought in. We must hold ourselves accountable. We serve the public, not our assumptions, not our fears." The press clamored with questions. But Chief Hayes stepped away, not offering more than that. Tyler watched from home and felt something shift. Not guilt, not yet, but fear. He wasn't the hero in this story anymore. He wasn't even the cop. He was the villain. Malik sat quietly in the hospital bed, staring out the window. He had barely touched his food. The nurses came and went. A therapist had visited earlier, gently trying to get him to talk about the incident. But Malik had shut down. The words stayed trapped inside him like smoke in a bottle. His mother stroked his hair. "You're strong," she whispered. "I don't want to be strong," he said. "I know," she said softly, "but you are, even when you don't want to be." Jonathan sat across the room, scrolling through his tablet. He was preparing for something big, something the family had tried to avoid for years, putting Malik in the center of a public conversation. They had always tried to protect his privacy. But this time, Malik wasn't just their son. He was a symbol, and Jonathan knew symbols had power. That night, Malik asked a question that broke them both. "Would he have done that, if I was white?" The room was silent. His father answered with all the honesty he had, "No, he wouldn't have." The days that followed were filled with silence. Not the peaceful kind, but the thick, suffocating quiet that lingered in Malik's hospital room like fog. The nurses spoke in whispers. The monitors beeped gently. Even the television remained off, unplugged by his mother, who couldn't bear to watch the headlines anymore. Malik barely spoke. When he did, his voice was soft and hollow, like it belonged to someone else. He refused to leave his bed, even when the doctors said he was physically ready. His legs were fine, his bruises were fading, but he didn't feel safe. Not in the hallway, not in the lobby, and certainly not out there, where the world saw his skin before his name. Jonathan tried to reach him, but even he knew some wounds didn't heal with hugs or promises. He sat by Malik's side every night, watching his son pretend to sleep, breathing just a little too evenly to be real. In therapy, Malik was cautious. The psychologist, Dr. Evangeline Moore, was gentle and intuitive, never pushing too far, always letting Malik set the pace. "Do you remember how you felt in that moment?" she asked one afternoon, her voice as soft as wind. Malik stared out the window. "I felt like I was already guilty. Like there was no version of that story where I came out okay." "Did you think you might die?" He nodded. "Yeah, just for sitting on a bench." She didn't speak for a while. She let his words settle into the room like dust. And then she asked, "What does safety look like to you?" Malik thought for a long time. Safety is not having to explain why you exist. It's walking somewhere and not feeling like you need to prove you belong. He didn't cry. Not then. But something shifted. Something opened. That night, he told his father he wanted to go home. Not to escape, but to face the world on his own terms. The protests began the next morning. Thousands gathered outside the police department. They carried signs, wore shirts with Malik's face, and chanted slogans that filled the air with righteous anger. Protect black children. We are not threats. Justice for Malik. It wasn't just Atlanta. From New York to Los Angeles, Chicago to Houston, the country had found a new rallying cry. This case wasn't just a tragedy, it was a mirror, reflecting a nation still broken in ways too many wanted to ignore. At the heart of the Atlanta protest stood Aisha Morgan, a former police officer turned activist. She held the mic with hands that had once worn the badge, and her voice rang with conviction. Malik Thompson is not the first child brutalized by a system built on fear and prejudice. But he must be the last. This is not a black problem. This is an American problem. And it ends now. The crowd erupted in cheers. But beneath the noise, in the shadow of microphones and camera flashes, another movement was growing. One determined to expose not just one officer, but the entire system that had enabled him. Within City Hall, Chief Eleanor Hayes met with the Civil Rights Oversight Committee, a task force brought in to investigate Tyler Jamison's record. What they found would make headlines the next morning. Officer Jamison had 5 previous complaints on file for excessive force, 3 involving young black men. All had been quietly dismissed, marked with vague notes like, insufficient evidence, or, officer followed protocol. But now, in the light of public scrutiny, the truth refused to stay buried. The report was damning. Tyler hadn't just made a mistake. He was a ticking time bomb that no one had bothered to defuse. When reporters confronted city officials, they stumbled over their answers. Internal miscommunication, incomplete files, a backlog of cases. But the public wasn't buying it anymore. Malik's face had become more than just a symbol. It had become a reckoning. Tyler sat alone in his apartment, staring at the TV. He didn't recognize himself anymore. Not the man on the news, whose face flickered on every screen. Not the man in the mirror, with red-rimmed eyes and stubble crawling across his cheeks. The world had turned against him. His family stopped answering his calls. His lawyer was growing impatient. His bank account was dwindling. He hadn't left his apartment in 4 days, too afraid of the cameras that swarmed his building. But none of that compared to the letter he received that morning. A formal notice. Officer Tyler Jamison is hereby subject to criminal investigation on the grounds of assault, abuse of power, and racially motivated misconduct. They were coming for him. And this time, he wouldn't be protected by the badge. His hands trembled as he poured whiskey into a glass. The bottle almost empty. He drank it in one gulp and reached for his service pistol. But then he paused. Not like this. He slid the weapon back into its case and slumped onto the floor, his back against the wall. He didn't understand what he had done wrong. Not really. To him, it had always been the job, the instinct, the gut feeling. But maybe, just maybe, he had never questioned whether those instincts were poisoned. He didn't sleep that night. The indictment came swiftly. A grand jury, having reviewed the video, the complaints, and Tyler's full record, charged him with assault of a minor with aggravated circumstances, use of excessive force, and civil rights violations. When the news broke, Atlanta stood still. Malik and his parents sat together in the living room, the TV on mute. The image of Tyler Jamison, now in handcuffs, escorted into the courthouse, was displayed on every channel. Jonathan looked over at his son. How do you feel? Malik didn't smile, but he didn't look away either. Like maybe, the world's listening. His mother reached for his hand. Jonathan turned to him. You know, you don't have to go to court. You don't have to testify. We'll protect you either way. Malik shook his head. No, I want to go. I want to look him in the eye and show him I'm not afraid anymore. The room was quiet, but filled with a quiet strength. Later that evening, Jonathan made another public appearance. Not as a grieving father this time, but as a leader. I want to be clear, he said. This is not about destroying one man. This is about accountability, about truth. If we want to heal, we must first look at the wound. And to those asking what justice looks like, justice is not a prison cell. Justice is change, real, structural, permanent change. He outlined a new federal proposal, the Malik Act, a sweeping reform package that would introduce national standards for police training, civilian oversight boards, mandatory body cams, and increased protections for minors during police interactions. It was bold, ambitious, and long overdue. But for the first time in years, the country felt a shift in the wind. This wasn't just a moment. It was a movement. And Malik, whether he had wanted to or not, had become the spark. The sun hadn't risen yet when the press vans lined up outside the courthouse. Satellite dishes unfolded like steel flowers. Cameras mounted, lenses fixed. A crowd of protesters had already gathered, their breath fogging in the morning chill, holding signs, chanting softly. Police cordoned off the area, their uniforms crisp, their faces stiff with the weight of national attention. Inside the courthouse, preparations were already underway. Microphones were tested, legal briefs were reviewed. The hallways smelled of coffee, floor polish, and tension. In a quiet room at the back of the courthouse, Malik sat with his parents, dressed in a navy blue suit that made him look older than his 14 years. His hands fidgeted in his lap, and his shoes tapped an anxious rhythm against the tiled floor. He looked up at his father. Will he look at me? Malik asked. Jonathan didn't answer immediately. I think so, he said eventually. But it doesn't matter if he does. What matters is that you're here. You're not running. Malik nodded. His mother squeezed his hand, her eyes shining but dry. They'd cried too many times in private. This morning was about something else. This morning was about courage. When the courtroom doors opened, the world seemed to hold its breath. Reporters stood shoulder to shoulder. Cameras clicked like rain on a rooftop. Activists and community leaders filled the gallery, sitting beside mothers who had lost sons, fathers who had buried children, and citizens who had grown weary of hashtags and empty apologies. Then came Tyler Jamison. He entered the courtroom in a dark gray suit, flanked by two attorneys. His hair was trimmed short, his expression unreadable. He looked thinner, worn down by sleepless nights and a world that no longer bent in his favor. He glanced at Malik only once, a flicker of a gaze that passed like a shadow. The trial began. Opening statements painted two radically different pictures. The prosecution spoke first, led by District Attorney Vanessa Cruz, a formidable woman with a voice like a blade. The defendant did not act out of fear, she said. He acted out of prejudice, out of impulse. He saw a child, and chose to treat him like a criminal. Without cause, without humanity. This is not just misconduct. This is a violation of civil rights, of public trust, and of basic decency. Tyler's defense attorney, a seasoned man with silver hair and a gravelly voice, leaned on the narrative of uncertainty. Officer Jamison responded based on training and experience. He encountered what appeared to be a suspicious situation in a high-crime area. While the incident was unfortunate, it was not criminal. He used force based on perceived non-compliance and public safety concerns. Malik listened in silence, every word thudding into his chest like a stone. But he didn't flinch. He was called to the stand on the third day. The courtroom hushed. Malik walked slowly to the front, his small frame dwarfed by the witness box. He took the oath, his voice steady. The prosecutor smiled at him, reassuringly, then began. Malik, she said gently, can you tell us what happened that day in the park? Malik nodded. He inhaled, and then, slowly, he told his story. I was waiting for my driver. My dad had sent him to pick me up. I had my music in. I didn't see the officer until he was in front of me. He looked angry. I didn't know why. He paused. His voice didn't tremble. He asked what I was doing. I told him I was just listening to music. He didn't believe me. He told me to stand up. I did. Then he grabbed me, pushed me to the ground. He said I was resisting. But I wasn't. I was scared. I cried. I couldn't breathe. The jury was silent. Several members wiped their eyes. Even Tyler lowered his gaze. Vanessa asked, "Did you threaten the officer in any way?" "No." "Did you have a weapon?" "No." "Did you try to run?" "No." "Were you afraid for your life?" Malik looked directly at the jury. "Yes. I thought he might shoot me. I didn't know if I'd ever see my parents again." There it was. The truth. Undeniable. Unfiltered. Unforgettable. When Malik stepped down, the silence that followed was heavier than applause. In a small, windowless room behind the courthouse, Tyler sat with his attorneys. He stared at the floor, unmoving. For the first time, something in him cracked. He remembered that day now with painful clarity. Not the way he had explained it. Not the way he had convinced himself it went. But the truth. He hadn't seen a child that day. He hadn't paused. He hadn't asked questions. He had reacted like a man chasing a ghost. Haunted by stories he'd inherited. Never questioned. He thought of Malik's face. The tears. The trembling voice. He looked up at his attorney. "Can I talk to him?" he asked. The attorney blinked. "To who?" "Malik. Just 5 minutes. No cameras. No lawyers. Just me and him." "That's highly irregular," the attorney muttered. "And probably not advised." "I don't care." The next day, the request was made, and after long, careful discussion, the Thompson family agreed, reluctantly. The meeting took place in a secure room, monitored by a federal marshal but otherwise private. Tyler sat at one end of the table. Malik entered, his father behind him, but only the boy took a seat. They looked at each other. Silence stretched between them like a bridge no one knew how to cross. Tyler spoke first. "I'm sorry." The words fell like bricks. "I know that's not enough." He added quickly, I needed to say it. I was wrong. I see that now. I've been wrong for a long time." Malik didn't respond. "I didn't see you. I looked at you, but I didn't see you. I saw every fear I was taught to have. And that's not your fault. That's mine." Malik finally said, "Do you think if I looked different, you would have still done it?" Tyler didn't hesitate. "No, I don't." A long pause followed. "Are you afraid now?" Malik asked. Tyler nodded. "Every day." Malik nodded too. "Now you know how I felt." He stood up. "I don't forgive you yet. Maybe I never will. But I hope you mean it. I hope you stay afraid until you understand why." Then he turned and walked out. Tyler didn't cry. But when the door closed, he put his head in his hands and sat alone with everything he finally understood. The verdict came 2 weeks later. The jury deliberated for just under 7 hours. The city waited. The nation waited. Even the president, watching from the Oval Office, kept his meetings on hold. The judge read the verdict aloud. On the charge of aggravated assault of a minor, guilty. On the charge of use of excessive force, guilty. On the charge of violation of civil rights under color of law, guilty. The courtroom gasped. Tyler lowered his head. He didn't protest. He didn't react. Malik, sitting beside his parents, felt his throat tighten. He didn't smile. He didn't cheer. He simply breathed. For the first time in months, he allowed himself to believe he might be okay. The sentencing was scheduled for a later date. The judge ordered that Tyler be remanded into custody immediately. As the bailiff led him away, Tyler paused, turned briefly toward Malik, and gave the smallest nod. Not for approval, not for sympathy, just acknowledgement. And then he was gone. Outside, the crowd erupted into a chorus of relief. Cheers mingled with tears. Strangers embraced. Reporters rushed to cover every angle. But for Malik, the noise melted into the background. He wasn't celebrating revenge. He was reclaiming his story. The letter arrived on a Monday morning. It came in a plain white envelope. Handwritten. No return address. The handwriting was careful, almost nervous, with slightly uneven letters that hinted at the weight behind them. It was addressed simply, Malik Thompson. At first, Malik didn't want to open it. He had just returned to school after a long absence. His days were quieter now, more thoughtful. He kept his circle small, close friends. His therapist, his parents. The world outside still buzzed. Still wanted sound bites and statements. But he had learned to say no. To choose silence when the noise got too loud. But something about the envelope felt different. Heavy. Personal. Unavoidable. That evening, sitting on the edge of his bed, Malik opened the envelope slowly, unfolding the single page inside. The handwriting was the same. The words were raw. Malik, I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even know if I deserve to write this. But after everything, after sitting in a cell thinking about that day over and over again, I realized I couldn't move forward until I said something to you, directly. Without cameras, without lawyers, without anyone trying to spin it into something it's not. I was wrong. I was completely, undeniably wrong. I saw you as a threat. Not because of what you did, but because of what I believed. What I had been taught to believe. What I never questioned until it was too late. I've spent my life telling myself I was protecting people, that I was the good guy. But on that day, I became everything I claimed to be against. I became the reason a child was afraid to sit in a park. I can't take that day back. I can't undo what I did to you. But I want you to know that you changed me. Your silence, your strength, your refusal to be broken, it shook me more than any punishment ever could. I'm trying to be better now. I know that doesn't erase the past. But I hope that maybe, someday, it can build something better for someone else. I'm sorry for all of it. Tyler Jamison. Malik stared at the letter for a long time. He didn't cry. Not this time. He folded it carefully, placed it back into the envelope, and put it in the drawer beside his bed. He wasn't sure how he felt. The pain was still there, still living under his skin. But so was something else, a quiet awareness that he had survived. And that his story had become more than pain. It had become power. Malik returned to school with his head held a little higher. He was met with hugs, with whispered apologies from classmates, and with a respectful distance from those who didn't know what to say. The teachers smiled more now, eyes filled with something like admiration. But Malik didn't want to be a celebrity. He wanted to be Malik. So he joined the debate team. He started tutoring younger students in math. He helped organize a student-led assembly on racial bias and resilience. He spoke softly but carried an undeniable gravity. Even those who didn't know his full story could feel it in the way he walked. The way he paused before speaking. The way he looked people in the eye. At the end of the school year, he was invited to speak at a citywide youth summit. The auditorium was packed. Cameras were rolling. But Malik didn't flinch. He stood at the podium, cleared his throat, and began. I used to think that silence was safety. That if I just kept my head down, didn't make waves, I could move through the world unnoticed. But silence didn't protect me. It almost erased me. He looked out at the crowd, black, white, brown, young, old, and continued. I'm not here to tell you to be angry. I'm here to tell you to be loud. Be loud with your love. Be loud with your truth. Be loud with your courage. Because being quiet never saved anyone. It just let the wrong people speak for us. The room erupted in applause. Malik smiled, not because he enjoyed the attention, but because he had found his voice. And now that he had it, he would never give it back. In Washington, the gears of government began to turn. The Malik Act, first proposed as a gesture of solidarity, gained traction faster than anyone anticipated. Lawmakers from both parties, pushed by public outcry and the vice president's relentless advocacy, began to see the political and moral necessity of change. Town halls were held, hearings were scheduled, police unions protested, civil rights leaders testified, and community organizations rallied behind the bill. For once, it seemed, the people's voices couldn't be ignored. The Malik Act proposed sweeping reforms. Mandatory body cameras with automatic upload to neutral cloud servers. Independent civilian oversight committees for every police department. Psychological evaluations and racial bias training for officers every 2 years. And federal protections for minors during law enforcement interactions. But perhaps the most radical section was this: a national database tracking complaints and misconduct by officers. Accessible to the public. The opposition was fierce. Some called it an overreach. Others called it a betrayal of law enforcement. But the tide had turned. The people demanded accountability. When the bill finally passed, 312 votes to 123 in the House, and a razor-thin margin in the Senate, there were cheers across the country. It wasn't a fix-all. It wouldn't erase centuries of injustice. But it was a step. And steps matter. At the signing ceremony, President Ellen Monroe stood beside Vice President Jonathan Thompson and young Malik. Dressed in a suit, a quiet resolve in his eyes. Today, the president said, we don't just pass legislation. We acknowledge a wound. We honor the courage of a child who refused to disappear. And we commit, together, to building a better nation for the next generation. Jonathan placed a hand on his son's shoulder. Malik didn't say much that day. But when a journalist asked him how he felt, he answered simply, like we're finally waking up. 1 year later, the world had moved on. The headlines faded. The protests slowed. New tragedies emerged. New stories filled the news cycle. That was how it always worked. But for Malik, life had changed forever. He was no longer the boy who sat in silence. He had become a young man with a mission. He started a nonprofit, the Bench Project, named for the park bench where everything changed. Its goal was simple: provide education, healing, and legal support for children affected by police violence. It started small, but grew rapidly, fueled by donations and momentum. And then, one afternoon in April, Malik returned to that same park for the first time. It had changed. A bronze plaque had been installed beside the bench. It read, "This bench belongs to every child who was told they didn't belong. Sit, rest, be seen." Malik sat down slowly, his hands in his lap. The air was soft, the breeze gentle. He closed his eyes. Somewhere in the distance, children laughed. A couple walked by, hand in hand. A bird landed on a nearby branch and sang. The world kept moving, but he had carved his place in it. Not with anger, not with revenge, but with truth. And that, he knew, was the most powerful justice of all.